George Blackman is a scriptwriter who has written YouTube videos for the likes of Noah Kagan, Film Booth, Ali Abdaal, Mike Shake, and Creator Wizard. In this video, he's going to be revealing what makes for a strong hook at the beginning of your videos, the mistakes that are killing your attention, how to understand your attention graphs, and his top 3 tips to improve your scripts. So George, what makes for a strong hook on YouTube?
One word for you, Jamie: clarity. This is a big thing that kind of spreads across lots of different things that we could talk about, but the biggest thing that I see, particularly in one-to-one sessions with the people that I work with and in the retention graph reviews that I do for my newsletter subscribers, is just being crystal clear, not overcomplicating what the video is about and breaking it down as simply as you can. So that partly comes down to the language that you use. You don't want too much jargon in the first couple of sentences. You don't want to try and prioritize being clever over being clear. And that's like a big one that I say a lot, is clarity over cleverness. I probably need to think of a way of saying that uses better words, but clarity is like the key thing. I think one of the ways that I think about breaking that down often, and this is regardless of whether you make entertainment content or educational content, is breaking it down into these kind of 3 bits. It is, who are the characters, what is the concept, and what is at stake. And this is something you can break down really quite easily. So if we're talking about an entertainment video, often the characters will be the people we're watching on screen, right? We want to know whether or not they're going to be able to achieve whatever it is the video is about. And that brings us on to the next bit. What is the video about, broadly speaking? Like, what are we going to be seeing these characters attempt? And then the third one, why is it interesting? What are the stakes? What is at stake for them? What happens if they fail? What do they stand to gain by winning? What do they stand to lose? So that's the entertainment side. Whereas when we're talking about educational videos, those 3 kind of steps, the character is more often than not the viewer. What we're doing in a piece of educational content is we are trying to reflect back basically at the viewer the things that they are feeling. And when the person in the video wins, it's basically a kind of mirror held up to the audience and saying this win is something that you want, and I'm showing you how to do it. So the character is you, essentially, as the viewer. The concept is whatever it is that they're trying to learn. And again, the stakes are what will happen to me. Like, for example, let's take Ali Abdaal's Why You're Always Tired video. The character is you. The concept is learning why you're always tired. The stakes are, without learning this stuff, you will remain tired going forward, essentially. And so those are the kind of stakes for you as the viewer. So character, concept, stakes, nice easy way to think about starting your video.
Okay, so having clarity, being very concise is quite important. I've heard many different people's opinions on this when it comes to the hooks around payoffs, because you set up an expectation with the title and the thumbnail, right? So you have a promise. A lot of people say you should pay that off straight away. You should show to people that it wasn't clickbait, and you should give the answer right away, and then open up another loop that holds them over for the rest of the video. What's your opinion on that? Do you believe that that's the correct way, or do you believe that you should just continue to hold on to that payoff at the end of the video and not give it away within those first 30 seconds?
So the way I always think about payoffs is that there's always going to be the kind of the ultimate payoff, but the way I view the kind of best scripts are the ones that create building blocks towards that ultimate payoff, where each of those building blocks is in itself a payoff. If we're talking about the ultimate answer to the video, I think it's always got to be nearer the end, because if the most interesting thing that happens immediately, then we're like, what are we strapping in for if we've already found out the answer that we came for right away? There is obviously a balance here, because if we're talking about certain review videos, people might appreciate being given the answer that they're looking for up front, and then listening to more of the review for whether it's a product or a game or a movie or whatever, to get an idea initially of, oh, this is a good game, this is a good film, this is a good product, but now I'm going to stay and listen for the nitty gritty, because in those situations, that will create viewer satisfaction. They're more likely to keep watching your review videos going forwards. But I think the vast majority of cases, you want something to pay off soon, but you want to try and save whatever the big question is or the big moment until later. I think ultimately it's about immediately, we've got the broad question of the video, again, whether it's education or entertainment. What is the thing we're waiting to see? What is the thing we're waiting to learn? How do we want to be transformed? But if we can basically leave that ultimate question till the end and set up a bunch of building blocks that are necessary to understand that final payoff, that's kind of the most ideal way.
What common mistakes do you see people making when writing their hooks, and I guess more broadly, their entire video script?
It often comes down to clarifying in their own mind what that big question is, what that big payoff is. So I was doing some work with a one-to-one client recently, and what I was experiencing with them was very similar to what I see across a lot of the reviews I do, where the general topic that they're talking about is interesting, and you can see that it's interesting to them. They're clearly passionate about it, but they haven't decided what that like big question is that they're trying to answer. So I think it can often be most helpful if at the start you kind of break down the talking points that you have in your mind for what this video is going to be about, but then looking through each of those talking points and thinking to the viewer, like, which of these is the most interesting, the least obvious, the most shocking potentially, and then figuring out how the other talking points can naturally build up to that ultimate question. This kind of comes back to the clarity thing. This is one of the biggest mistakes, is if you don't have that clarity in your own head of what we're trying to guide the audience towards, then it's a lot easier for your writing to kind of go astray a little bit and not be super focused, to become a bit rambly. So it's clarity in your own head really over what that big idea of the video is.
When you write scripts for your clients and you open up Notion or Google Docs and you're sat there with a blank page, what is the first step that you take to ensure that you get a good script at the end?
So if we're going on the assumption that you've already figured out a rough title for this thing and a way to package it kind of fairly, the first kind of step once you've got that blank page is really just free-flowing, spamming the ideas down that you think could be interesting for this video. And it's judgment-free, and you fully accept that you may end up deleting half of what you've written down, but it's just that initial kind of brainstorm where you think, in the type of video that I'm imagining creating right now, what do I need to talk about? What should be in there? That's kind of when it comes to education. When it comes to entertainment, again, it really depends what you're doing. If it's that you're trying to learn a new skill or break into a factory or whatever it is, and a little bit of preliminary research is needed. So that's when you're going to think, okay, this is what I think I want to do. I hope it's possible. If it is, what do I need to know? And what would the kind of steps be for me getting from A to B? But the real takeaway from that first bit is not worrying particularly about what the hook's going to be. This is at least how I do it. Not worrying about anything other than, is there enough interest here in the points that I'm thinking of to go ahead with making this video?
What are the common retention killers you've seen from analyzing hundreds of retention graphs?
The big one, and this is particularly pertinent when it comes to educational videos, particularly listicles, is, and it always comes back to the payoff, right? A lot of what we're talking about here is going to be related to payoffs. It's when the payoff is given before the context, or rather explaining something that can be understood very quickly and then spending another minute talking about it or giving examples. What you ideally want, and again, the tendency to do that is that that's kind of how we talk to each other, right? You're going to kind of, it just feels more conversational to say, and the next thing I want to talk about is this, so let's go into it. But the issue is, particularly when it is something that's very understandable at a pinch, and I think it pays to assume your viewers are intelligent a lot of the time, because they probably are. The problem there is it gives them permission to skip ahead, because if I feel like I've understood something, and I think we've all experienced this, right, where maybe we're troubleshooting something on our computer and we look up a tutorial for whatever we're trying to do. And particularly when it comes to like tech tutorials, there's always like a 2-minute spiel at the start where they introduce themselves and talk about blah, 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 blah. And you're skipping around looking for like the thing that you actually came for. And again, like the issue there is, if you give what they've come for immediately, I'm closing that tab. I've got what I needed. I'm closing this now, and I'm back to whatever it was that I was doing before. So the key there is really just reversing the order of information. And the joy of this problem is that it is a fairly easy fix a lot of the time. We want to build up that context. We want to create curiosity building up to the point at which we reveal what we're talking about. And again, the advantage of doing it this way is that we do something that's very, very important for your audience, which is making them feel smart. So I had a boxing channel that was speaking to me the other day, and I reviewed his graph in my newsletter. It's actually the boxer who was training Michelle Khare in that incredible video she made recently. I only just discovered it was the same guy, which was really cool. But his video was really, really cool. But the issue was, I think it was like a 10 boxing techniques if you're a short person to beat someone who's taller than you. And the issue was, at the start of each tip, he'd be like, this is the tip. And then he'd kind of demonstrate it, which was cool. But the suggestion I had for him was, what if rather than doing it that way around, you start the section by going into the technique and showing them what it is that you're doing against your opponent. Not only does that delay the time until you give away what it is, but it actively engages the viewer's mind, because they're now looking at it as a boxer and trying to interpret what it is that's happening before they get told. And again, a lot of the time they probably will figure it out before you actually get to the payoff, but then that just makes them feel smarter because they've had to like work it out rather than being given it on a plate. So lots of advantages to that. And that is really a key one I've found is placement of payoffs and spending too long dissecting something once we've given the point away.
Is there sort of a mental model or philosophy that you have when it comes to payoffs that people can look at when it comes to writing their own scripts? How can they identify what those special moments are?
I suppose a little bit of common sense and introspection is needed to figure out what they are. Something that I do that makes it a lot easier to identify where they are is literally going through and highlighting what I think is a payoff in some way. So think of them as just the aha moments, right? Where you've either shown them something that's interesting or exciting, something that they've been anticipating, or you've taught them something that is instrumental in creating that ultimate payoff at the end. Aha moments are just like the thing. And once you really look through it, and I think this is maybe something to talk about anyway, but I find this is kind of the last step of editing the script. We can maybe talk through the full process, but this is very much, I don't think from a retention mindset until the script is basically all done. This is very much a last, you can be thinking about it a little bit, but the final kind of test is going through it and highlighting, this is a payoff, this is a payoff, this is a payoff. And it's so much easier to see visually then, right, we've got this huge chunk of time here where there isn't really anything that's been paid off. That can be fine as long as we've kind of made it clear what that next payoff is that we're building up towards. The audience always needs to know what it is they're sticking around for next. But it's just a helpful kind of indicator that maybe we've got too many payoffs here or nothing going on for a while here. But yeah, as for identifying them, I feel like you gradually get a sense for that over time.
Okay, do you want to talk a little bit more about the entire script that you just mentioned?
Yeah, so this is kind of like I tweeted about this once, about the kind of like different hats that you wear when you're scripting a video or planning a video, where that first one, I actually forget the names of all the hats I gave, but the first one is like the painter's hat, where it's, like I said before, very free flowing. You're just like getting the ideas down. It doesn't really matter if it's messy. It doesn't have to be perfect. The main thing is just getting those initial thoughts out. Then I like to genuinely take a break and like not think about it for half an hour or something, do another task, whatever it is, go for a walk, all the classics. I'm no expert on how to like optimize the productivity for this, but I definitely like to not think about it. The next step is then figuring out, like we spoke about at the start, what the main point is, and really ascertaining what is the most thing that's most interesting to me, but that also is the most interesting to my audience, and that is going to be the ultimate final big question that we're answering, or the big moment that we're showcasing. And from that, then figuring out the building blocks that get you there, and rearranging those talking points so that it would flow naturally from one thing into the other. So that's the structure then worked out. And once you have that, then again, I take some time, get a cup of tea, go for a walk, wait till the next day. Obviously, this can be condensed. And then it's about fleshing it out. And again, the first time I flesh it out, I get the kind of artist's hat almost back on, where I'm not thinking too precisely, but I want to make sure that it does work, that it does flow from A to B. Now I've started writing it. Next round, tightening that up, making sure you're not being too wordy, there's not too much jargon, and it all basically should then tighten up to be something that, if push came to shove, you could sit down and record. And then the final phase is that retention phase, like I said, where the sentences are all as they should be. They're kind of as optimized as they can be. But now it's about ordering those sentences, and within the structure, just making those little tweaks to try and make sure the video is as tight as it can be, and as entertaining and as engaging as you would like it to be.
So you mentioned a few times there around getting into the mind of your viewer, your target audience. What tips do you have for how we as YouTubers can get into the mind of our viewers and know exactly what it is that they want from a particular video, and then take those thoughts and put it down on the paper where it just makes sense and will resonate with our viewer?
So one of the interesting things I've seen a YouTuber called Jenny Hoyos doing recently, she's just passed 1 million subs, I think, or maybe 2 million. I think 1 million. She basically asks something like, which of my cooking hacks have you actually tried since I showed you them, right? So she does lots of really successful shorts, different kind of cooking related stuff, and stuff beyond that. But from that, you can kind of get a sense of, oh, right, this one clearly resonated the most because it actually caused people to take action on what I was doing. I should probably do more of that. There's a creator that I'm working for called Mike Shake at the moment, who is an entertainment YouTuber, learns difficult physical, mental skills. And I remember scrolling through his community section and seeing what kind of things he'd asked. And quite simply, he once asked, can you backflip? And that was it. Because again, it's like you can work out from that, well, if 90% of my audience can backflip, me making a 20-minute video learning to backflip is not going to be interesting because everyone can already do it. So the community section is like a big one, but I think there's definitely additional steps of creativity you can take there to kind of get into the minds of what your viewers have been enjoying. But then beyond that, there was one creator I reviewed called Jason Farmer, who I messaged him about this to kind of find out what his audience avatar creation process was like. And he said, and this kind of blew me away, he's got, I think, some sort of spreadsheet where he literally goes through the comments on every single one of his videos. And his videos get thousands and thousands of views, sometimes millions. And he will just take every question, every comment that's kind of related to what they'd like to see more of or anything like that, collates them in this spreadsheet, and I mean, literally takes data essentially on what the most common desires are of his audience. So it really depends how much time you're willing to put into it, but you can be creative with it. And by the looks of it, you can go quite deep if you're willing to spend that time reading your comment sections and seeing what people would like to see from you.
So you've analyzed so many different retention graphs out there. What are the common retention graph pitfalls that you see, and how do people stop that from happening going forward?
I mean, caveat to all of this, every retention graph is very context dependent. So there are no right and wrong, I suppose, but there are definitely patterns that you observe and that I've picked up that happen time after time. So the first one out the gate is related to what we spoke about in terms of swapping payoff and context. So if the payoff comes too early and then you give it context afterwards and spend ages talking about it, that's when you get the kind of like very spiky graph where it's like a downhill ski slope essentially, where people evidently, there's little spikes across the graph getting lower and lower. That is essentially an indication that people are finding it too easy to skip ahead in your video because you're giving too much away. So the fix there is what we spoke about earlier, swapping. So you're no longer doing payoff context, instead you're giving context then payoff. The next one that I see a lot, which you may have seen in your videos, is where there's an initial big drop and then it kind of goes up again, maybe around a minute or something. And that's an indication that your intro is too long, essentially, or that people have gathered again. I guess it's related to the last graph we spoke about as well. But essentially, you're not getting into the meat of the video quick enough. People do not need all the information that you're giving early on. This might be where you're spieling off all your credentials as a real estate agent or a doctor or a dentist or whatever it is that you think is necessary at the start. Again, there's a balance there. To some extent, depends what the video is, you might need to give that kind of context. But essentially, if that's happening over time, your intros are too long. And another one that I see, and this is maybe harder to identify because there could be multiple reasons for this, but is the particularly, not especially spiky, but the quite slow, consistent decline across the course of a video. This tends to happen more when the video's got more views, because the fewer views there are, the more kind of generally spiky the graph can look because there aren't as many data points. But if the video is just on a gradual decline the whole way through, I think I've referred to this one as like the gradual realization graph. And again, it comes back to payoffs. And I've often observed this in videos where they're really well made. The video is visually engaging. The creator is really strong in front of camera, and it almost tricks you into thinking that the video is really cool, which it is for the majority of the time. It's fine, but it's the gradual realization that I haven't learned anything new for however many minutes. I'm sat here like I'm engaged in what they're saying just about, but I don't actually know what it is that I'm waiting around for now. I feel like my question's been answered, or I've even forgotten what my question was at the start of this because they're just talking about something else now. And that often comes down to just a lack of focus on what the video's topic is, and like we spoke about before with payoff placement. But if you have got that slow, gradual decline, I think it's really worth just watching your video back, trying to be as objective as you can and thinking, what am I waiting for now as the viewer? Is that clear to me? Or am I just half engaged because the creator's entertaining, but actually after 60% of the video, I have no reason to keep watching. So that's a big one to look out for. So
how can YouTubers think about scripts differently than they currently are?
Ooh, that's a mighty fine question. Yeah, so this may be a slightly anecdotal piece of evidence here. Like this is all just off of what I've observed. But I think there's this kind of wave now where more and more people are realizing the value of a script. And I think that's something that I'm quite deliberately trying to push on my social media generally, partly because it's my business and it's my livelihood depends on people wanting people to write good scripts for them. I think the idea that you can kind of sit down in front of camera with a bunch of bullet points, if you care about creating the most engaging video you can and the most kind of retention focused, is not realistic, because a lot of the time, like, again, it's like what I've spoken about with the structure of the payoffs and everything else. You can't be intentional with any of that stuff if you don't know what it is you're going to say in minutes 1 to 2. If you've got a vague idea, cool, but it's especially difficult to be intentional with foreshadowing and setting up the next mini payoff and establishing, again, what the ultimate goal of the video is in a way that is precise without having a script there. So the big mindset shift for me is just where you can, the more prep that you can do beforehand, the more you can really think about, like, structure is such a big thing. And I know I keep banging on about it, but getting that structure right ahead of time, if you put that time in, that essentially infects like every sentence that you write for the rest of the script, and it actually narrows your options when you know exactly what it is that you're trying to do with the video, because you've spent time thinking about it, and it makes the whole process a lot easier. It makes it easier for your editor, who, if that's you maybe or someone else, you no longer have to spend ages thinking, she's kind of rambling there, maybe he didn't need to say that, but I'm not sure if I can cut that out because maybe I need that for something that happens later, and all of that. So I think the mindset shift for scripts is try and write them where you can. Doesn't work for everyone. I've said this before, like some clients I've worked with in the past, they just don't jive with a word-for-word script, and maybe that's the same for you. But I think the assumption for most people is that it's not necessary, or that you can get away with it without writing one. But actually, it's definitely worth investing that time in it if you can, just to see if it works for you.
I think the biggest struggle that people have with using a word-for-word script is that on paper it sounds good, but when they start to record it, it doesn't really feel like them. There's a lot of tone that's missing. How do you think about incorporating that into the script to just make it feel more natural and authentic with that particular YouTuber?
It comes down to repetition, trying it a lot, but you've literally got to read it out loud. And this is something I learned in a big way when I was working with a client who had, hundreds of thousands of subscribers, and watching the raw footage of them trying to kind of read it, you could just tell that like I'd missed their tone a little bit, and it does show up. And in this case, I hadn't really spent time reading it aloud. I hadn't spent time thinking about their voice. So again, for you, it is just like you've got your own voice. It's in your head. So sit there and read it out, see how it goes. And this probably comes after the script is basically done and ready to go. These are the very minor tweaks at the end. Sit down, read it out, tweak bits that you can. But the rule also is like, once you're actually sat recording it, you don't have to stick to it word for word. It's just having the word for word script means that you've absolutely nailed down the structure and the overall kind of feeling of the video. But if in the moment you need to skim over a couple of words, like that's totally fine. It's your voice, it's your video, but just spend that little bit of time reading it aloud to see if it kind of flows first of all.
Yeah, something that I've found with word-for-word teleprompter scripts is some YouTubers love them, some people are against them, and the clients that I've worked with, whenever we have tried using a teleprompter, the retention is just so much higher, usually by about 10 to 15%, which is huge in YouTube terms, but that's mostly because it means that you're much more concise. You don't ramble, you don't tend to go off on tangents. The examples that you use are a little bit more well thought out rather than just whatever pops into your head in that moment. And all of that can shave off like 2 minutes of the watch time and just, as I said, communicate way more effectively. And so retention's up, which is great. But a lot of people always say, I can see in the data that yes, that's the case, but it takes the enjoyment out of this for me to just read from a teleprompter and not have bullet points and just riff on it. But what I found is to actually kind of have like a 50-50 or 75-25 split between teleprompter and rambling. So the way that I've kind of come to this conclusion now is, especially the hook and the introduction of the video, that has to be word for word script because you really have to think about that. But there are certain parts within that video where you can just say riff, or say a story that relates to you, and you can kind of be off the cuff. And I think that makes it a little bit more authentic. You don't sound as much like a robot. And sure, the retention might take a bit of a hit because you're now sort of not being concise and you're just reading from bullet points. But I found like that's a nice middle balance where YouTubers seem to enjoy it and get the best of both worlds. I think that that's the best approach at this particular stage. I know for me, when it comes to YouTube videos, I kind of prefer that. And I actually use an app called Prompt Smart Pro, I believe it's called, where it follows based on the words that you're saying. And so if you are to go off the cuff and just ramble for 30 seconds, the teleprompter will stay still. And so you can very quickly go back to that sentence that you were talking on, and then the teleprompter will continue and you're back on track. And so I find like having those moments just makes a script seem way, way better to read from. And I always feel like it comes out much better in the edit.
That's really cool. I'd not heard of that, but I know I completely agree. And it's often interesting. I do watch back every time the client videos that I've worked on. And there are just those little moments where you'll see them just do a little aside or make a little joke, which I didn't write, and it just elevates that sense of personality. And this is kind of the thing that I'm a bit stuck on generally with my whole like thing in all this, is that I ended up being the kind of like retention graph person who like, send me your retention graphs, I'll analyze them and whatever else. But I don't, in the same breath, I don't want to be known as the soulless scriptwriter guy. Because ultimately the retention graph, like I said, is so dependent on context and often meaningless in some regards in terms of the conclusions that we can draw from them. It's not always obvious why a video is done really well, or sometimes it is. It's such a, it's not a black and white thing. So I mean, for sure, keeping the elements of personality in there is a balance to be struck.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so switching gears here for a moment, like us, the people listening here, if you hang out on Twitter, in the YouTube space, you'll kind of see everyone talking about how important storytelling is when it comes to creating content. Can you break that down for us and sort of why is it so important? Why is everyone talking about storytelling?
I mean, I don't know how spiky my takes will be on this particular thing. I think it's the usual situation with YouTube where it comes and goes in waves. And I think, we're kind of potentially exiting the beastification era to a point. Like, obviously, he's going to keep on doing really well. The channels that have imitated that style are going to keep doing well as well. But I think, like any cycle, like fashion or comedy or music or whatever, the stage that comes after is often in opposition to the stage that came before. And I'll re-reference it again, actually. The Michelle Khare boxing video that came up was a real kind of masterclass in showing those moments that don't have to be super retention hacky and something happening all the time. Just letting moments sit is something that's really underrated. It's something that Ryan Trahan does really well as well. Like there's this GTA video that he made a while ago where like it's the dumbest video ever, but it's one of my favorite on YouTube because he sets up all these mini goals for himself, and there's a point at which he manages to get his first car, and then we just sit and kind of watch him driving it for 7-8 seconds to nothing except a bit of music, and it allows us to connect more with the person that we're talking to. That's talking to us, that we're watching, when we experience those kind of human moments with them, and we're allowed to have those moments of calm and peace and thinking how they must be feeling in that moment. So I think ultimately it's a bit more human, and potentially in a world where everything is super attention grabby, whether it's YouTube or our phones or TikTok or whatever it is. You kind of want that chance to just slow down a bit, and storytelling is a kind of big way in which we can do that.
So all stories come to an end, and we call that call to action on YouTube. How important is a call to action, and how can YouTubers create stronger call to actions to get more clicks on those videos? Because most people, I feel, they don't really understand how important that part of the video is. Usually if you look at their retention graphs, it's like a cliff. How can people flatten that out and get them to continue binge watching all of their content?
The first thing is always, if your goal is to make someone watch your next video, which is, you've helpfully teed me up with this, but that's always what I say is the best, because it helps grow multiple videos, helps grow your channel more than just at the end saying, oh, make sure to subscribe, which is also fine. But so it depends what your goal is. If your goal is to make them watch more content, the key is to as best as possible, not indicate that the video is about to end. So don't fade in a kind of outro track that's very evidently saying, okay, this is basically the end now. There's nothing more for me to say. I'm just going to keep on talking for another 10, 20 seconds and see how you feel. You want to make as though you're about to say something else that is incredibly necessary for understanding the whole context of this video that you've just spoken about. Again, this is like the film booth school of retention, maybe not the right word, but the school of thinking where you want them to feel like they don't have all the information yet. And so the kind of 3-step formula that I use for this, and it's honestly wild how effective this is. Maybe we can get some screenshots of videos that I've used this on, and people have used it in their videos and sent me screenshots of their click-through rate at the end versus their channel average. Is first of all a link. That doesn't mean a URL, it means a link back to something that has been mentioned in this video, essentially. So again, it feels like, oh, we're drawing on something that they've already watched, they're already interested in. The next is open a curiosity gap, that being, but you're not going to understand this without understanding this, or this is all pointless until you have recognized whatever it is, whatever we're opening the curiosity gap to. And then the third step is the promise. And that promise is essentially, by clicking this next video, you'll get that answer. So link, curiosity gap, promise. It works like a charm, like an absolute charm. So definitely give that a try if you're trying to get people to watch your next video. I guess the key thing and the sticking point is you got to make sure the video you're selecting is something that is going to be relevant to the people who've just watched this one. But once you've built up a bank of content, it's often a choice between like, 3 of these videos could work. Which one can I pick? But you've got to pick the right video. Otherwise, people are going to start mistrusting your recommendation at the end.
What are the top 3 things YouTubers can do to improve their scripts?
Let's kind of break it into like hook, main video, end. So the hook, it's coming up with the payoff. And this again affects the entire video. Knowing what that ultimate payoff is, the big moment of the video, the most interesting reason people have to be watching, establishing that clearly in your head. That's the thing you've got to do at the very start. The next thing, being aware of those mini payoffs during the video. So again, this comes down to highlighting those payoffs throughout the video and being very intentional with the language that you're using, every sentence that you're structuring. And so ultimately that comes down to being willing to try word for word scripting. And then the final thing is the call to action. Link, curiosity gap, promise, making sure people keep on watching your content. It's going to increase their session time spent on your channel. It's going to get your videos more views, which is more likely to get your videos recommended to other people and grow your channel a little bit faster.
If you enjoyed that video with George, consider subscribing. And if you'd like to improve your storytelling on YouTube, click here to see how the best creators like Casey Neistat, Mr. Beast, and Dodford create videos that are impossible to click away from.